I got a story today. Pete Hegseth wanted an American Crusade. Now he's leading a war in the Middle East. By Zachary B. Wolf. Analysis by CNN. The CNN analysis examines how rhetoric from Pete Hegseth, the United States Defense Secretary, has shaped perceptions of the ongoing conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran. The article centers on Hegseth's earlier writings and speeches, particularly language from his book American Crusade, which uses religious and civilizational themes to describe geopolitical struggles. Critics argue that such language frames the conflict in moral and religious terms rather than strictly strategic ones. The analysis suggests that this framing has become controversial as the war with Iran unfolds. The conflict itself began after joint U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran in late February of 2026, targeting military and nuclear infrastructure. The Iran war escalated quickly after those strikes, with Iran responding through missile and drone attacks on Israeli territory and United States bases in the region. The initial attacks were part of a campaign to weaken Iranian military capabilities and prevent the development of nuclear weapons. CNN's analysis argues that critics view Hegseth's rhetoric as reinforcing the idea that the conflict is ideological rather than purely strategic. Some analysts warn that describing geopolitical conflicts as civilizational struggles can intensify tensions with Muslim-majority countries. They argue that such language may complicate diplomacy and reinforce perceptions of a broader cultural conflict. The article also notes that some opponents believe in the framing risks blurring the line between national security and religious or cultural narratives. Supporters of Hegseth, however, argue that his comments reflect long-standing American alliances and values. They emphasize that the United States' support for Israel has historically been framed partly in terms of shared democratic institutions and strategic cooperation. From the perspective, references to civilizational or cultural ties are seen as rhetorical rather than literal cause for religious war. Advocates also argue that the central objective of the campaign remains preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons and threatening regional stability. The analysis further places the controversy within the broader history of American political rhetoric about the Middle East. Since the early 2000s, debates about the language used to describe conflicts in the region have been frequent. Critics often warn that religious language can invoke memories of historic conflicts such as medieval crusades, which can carry powerful symbolic meaning in global politics. Because of this historical context, analysts say leaders must carefully choose their words when describing military operations. The article also explores domestic political implications. The war with Iran has sparked debate inside the United States about the goals, duration, and cost of the conflict. Lawmakers and analysts have questioned whether the decisive military action was necessary to counter Iranian aggression. CNN ultimately presents the controversy as an example of how rhetoric can shape public understanding of war. Political language used by officials may influence how both allies and adversaries interpret American intentions. In this case, critics believe the crusade framing risks inflaming tensions, while supporters see it as symbolic expression of Western alliances and values. The article concludes that the debate reflects a larger question about how the United States should describe and justify its role in conflicts in the Middle East. Pete Hegseth is the United States Secretary of Defense in the article, a former television commentator and U.S. Army National Guard officer. Before entering government service, he was a prominent political commentator and author of American Crusade, a book discussing Western civilization and American political identity. His past writings and rhetoric about cultural conflict are central to the debate described in the article. American Crusade is a book written by Pete Hegseth discussing American culture, politics, and Western identity. Critics of Hegseth's rhetoric reference passages from his book and frame geopolitical conflicts in civilizational terms. The CNN article examines how those earlier statements are being interpreted during the current conflict with Iran. Okay, let's talk about this. I just read it and I have to say I haven't laughed this hard all week. It's a perfect example of the absolute panic and sheer terror that they are feeling right now. They're scrambling to find anything to grab onto, and what they've landed on is so revealing and tone deaf it's almost a gift. The headline is Pete Hegseth wanted an American Crusade. Now he's leading a war in the Middle East. You can just hear the author hyperventilating as he typed it. To him and his ilk, crusade is a bad word that's supposed to make you think of religious intolerance and Western aggression, but to me, it sounds like exactly what we need right now. A righteous fight for what is right. The article's entire premise is that Pete Hegseth is some kind of wild-eyed religious zealot who is leading our military into a holy war. They quote him saying things like, "The providence of our almighty God is there protecting these troops." And they act like this is some shocking, unprecedented statement. They are horrified that he quoted Psalm 144, "Blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hand for war, and my fingers for battle." Are you kidding me? For centuries, for the entirety of this country's existence, our leaders have openly and proudly talked about their faith in God. George Washington didn't win the Revolutionary War by appealing to secular humanism. Abraham Lincoln didn't guide the nation through its darkest hours with sociological theories. They understood, as Hegseth does, that there is a moral order to the universe and that America is on the side of right, and the right comes from God. The media has spent the last 50 years trying to scrub every trace of faith from the public square. They want our leaders to be soulless technocrats who make decisions based on polls and spreadsheets, not on principles and prayer. They want a military that is sterile, a godless killing machine, devoid of any higher purpose, And now they have a Secretary of War who is an unapologetic Christian, and they can't handle it. They're like vampires recoiling from a cross. The article is desperate to paint Hegseth as an extremist. But what's their evidence? His tattoos? Let it be known that I hate tattoos. They are sinful. You are not to mark the body that God gave you. So when they try to call him an extremist, I asked them to show me where he is. Sometimes I think to myself, what it'd actually be like if we lived under 1/8 of the dictatorship that the media frames the current administration to be like. Likely we'd live in paradise. They go into great detail about his Jerusalem cross and his Deus Vult tattoo, which means God wills it. They breathlessly tell us that this is a rallying cry of Christian knights as they marched to Jerusalem. To them, this is proof that he's a dangerous radical. To me, it's proof that he's a man who understands history and isn't afraid to wear his convictions on his sleeve. Then they bring up his 2020 book, American Crusade. They quote from it trying to make it sound like he's calling for war against all Muslims. He wrote, "We don't want to fight, but like our fellow Christians 1,000 years ago, we must." CNN presents this as bloodthirsty manifesto, but any sane person reading it understands what it is. It's a reluctant acknowledgement that sometimes you are forced into a fight that you don't want. The Islamist fanatics who run Iran have been at war with the US since 1979. This isn't a new war. They've been killing soldiers and our allies for decades. Hegseth is simply saying that the time for pretending that this isn't the case is over. America is in a fight whether we like it or not. The most hilarious part of the article is when it tries to find the victims of Hegseth's religious extremism within the military. They try out this group called the Military Religious Freedom Foundations run by a guy named Mikey Weinstein. I'll say it again, Weinstein. This is an organization whose entire purpose is to root out fear in the armed forces. They want to court-martial a soldier for saying God bless you. They are the reason our military has been neutered by Democrat policies and diversity training that does not make it stronger, but weakens it. Weinstein claims he's getting numerous complaints from service members who are scared that the war is part of the end times Bible prophecies. He can't verify any of these complaints, of course, because the people making them supposedly fear retribution. It's the oldest trick in the book. Make an anonymous claim, attribute it to unnamed sources, and present it as fact. It's fake news, plain and simple. It's how they got Nixon, by the way. The reality is that the vast majority of our troops are people of faith. They come from small towns and big cities all across the country, and they believe in God. They believe in the mission of this country. For the first time in a long time, they have a Secretary of War who openly supports them and who shares their values. Hegseth is trying to make, and I quote, "the Chaplain Corps great again," because he knows that spiritual strength is just as important as physical strength. He knows that our troops need a connection with the Almighty God in these moments. The only people who are alienated by this are the tiny fraction of secularists who should have never joined the military in the first place. The article accidentally stumbles onto the truth when it notes that Hegseth believes Islamists are enabled by American leftists against God-fearing Christian Americans. This is the central truth of our time. The left, both here and abroad, has made a common cause with the most radical and violent elements of Islam. Why? Because they share a common enemy, Western civilization, and especially Christian America. They both hate the traditional family. They both hate capitalism. They both hate the idea that America is a force for good in the world. So they work together even though their ideologies are completely incompatible. The left cheers on Hamas and cries for the poor oppressed Iranians because they see them as fellow victims of American imperialism. It's sick, twisted, and this alliance must be stopped. And Hegseth is one of the few people in the world who is willing to call it out. So what does this CNN hit piece really mean for us? It means we're winning. It means the people who have been running this country into the ground are losing their minds because they're losing power. They see a strong, confident Christian man leading our military, and it shatters their entire worldview. They see a president who isn't afraid to call our enemies evil and to fight them, and it terrifies them. They want you to be scared of Pete Hegseth. They want you to think he's a dangerous theocrat who is going to force your kids to pray and start World War III. Don't fall for it. This man is exactly what we need. He's a warrior who understands that we are in a spiritual battle as much as a physical one. He understands that our freedoms are God-given, not government-granted. He understands that America is a special nation, a shining city on the hill, and that he has a duty to defend it. The left is afraid because they know that when America is led by people with faith and conviction, she is unstoppable. They're afraid because they know that their ideology of weakness, apology, and moral relativism is no match for the righteous power of a nation that knows God is on their side. So let them write their hysterical articles, let them wring their hands about Christian nationalism and crusades. We know the truth. We know that this isn't about conquering land or converting people by the sword. This is about defending freedom, protecting the innocent, and standing up to an evil in the world that desperately needs to be stopped. And for the first time in a long time, we have leaders who aren't afraid to be exactly that. God bless them for it.